come once again to discuss things.
On that note, hi everyone, welcome to the latest episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Partu. Joining me today is Steve Baxey, as always. Squatch Gang, aka Rasco, is joining us as well. And we finally got a hold of motherfucking Milan Jeftik.
Hey, I'm in the process of getting drunk.
Yeah, Milan is getting drunk besides the regular reasons to also celebrate my engagement.
Yeah.
I'm engaged.
I
thank you.
Got a reason to drink.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks for all the kind wishes, everyone. It's an exciting time as I get older, and you know we're getting close. I did the math a couple weeks ago, and I think we're somewhere between 10 and 20 episodes of Geeky Gentlemen before we hit 300.
Oh wow!
Right?
We're gonna hit 300 this summer. That's crazy.
Yeah, like Rasco and I have been doing fan film reviews. That's helping the number like creep up pretty quickly.
I've been watching those. Those are great, by the way.
Thank you, sir.
They are great, aren't they?
Yeah, even when they're like on really bad fan films.
That's the most fun.
Yeah.
Well, like Rasco seems to be picking the ones that are like really super like famous almost in the world of fan films, and I'm picking ones that I'd never seen or heard of before, and so it's creating a really odd dynamic. Anyway,
contrast in quality. Okay, that's
yeah.
What's going on here.
Yeah, we'll make it sound intentional. Anyway, so tonight on Geeky Gentlemen, we're discussing a really big question that is, I think, probably the most interesting question to come up in philosophy in the last 50-ish years. 50 to 100 years, give or take. And it's not like a really abstract question in the traditional sense of a philosophical issue like, what is, but instead, it's actually something that's kind of practical as we move into a more futuristic, more science fiction-like world.
It's practical to a point, but we'll get there.
Yeah, and it's something that science fiction films deal with a lot, and it's a really interesting question. But it's also a question that that when you first hear it, most people have a knee-jerk reaction of they think they know the answer. But the more you think about it, the more complicated and interesting question it becomes. So the question we're going to tackle tonight on Geeky Gentlemen and provide the definitive answer to, that is our mandate, by the way, we're going to provide the definitive answer to whether or not machines can think.
Well, why don't we just ask Steve?
Well, you wouldn't want to do that because Steve's wrong about everything.
No,
well,
this is true, but I am a robot.
That's it. I mean, if you like any and all photographs and other video things I've seen of Steve's face, his eyes never change. Have you noticed that? Like there's this hollow, empty void.
Well, I don't know a lot of people that look into my eyes, so you know. Thanks for that.
And like your voice is so hollow, but yet you're very intelligent. You know, you're obviously incredibly intelligent and sophisticated, but there is just simply no soul there.
I'm like Soundwave, except less creaky.
Yeah. But, like, Ian, like, where did you find this individual? Like,
blame Cap.
No, but seriously, you, my friend, are the closest thing to an android we could possibly have. Like, you know, we have some option of perspective.
Yeah, and like I think it's interesting that we have the panel together that we do tonight for this, because Steve and I obviously have a background in philosophy, and Rasco, unless talking to Steve and I has made you change what you were going to make your major when you go to college. You have very little to no background in philosophy, and I know Milan doesn't know a goddamn thing.
I am a paranoid schizophrenic, though, so I guess
So it's just, this will be an interesting discussion, because we'll get an outsider perspective, and we'll get, people who have read arguments on this kind of perspective. And so I think the best way to go about this is just to provide a yes or no answer that no one has to stick to, of just, when you first heard this question, what was your answer? So your opinion could have changed now, but when you first heard this question posed to you, what was your immediate knee-jerk answer? And for me, it was no. Steve, how about you?
If we're talking knee-jerk reaction, then yeah, it was no.
Rasco?
Knee-jerk reaction, I'm gonna say... Shit. I'll go ahead and say yes, but there's a caveat to that, but I'll get to that later.
Sure thing. And Milan, how about you?
I'm sure machines can think. Why not?
Okay. Now, who wants to stick to their answer?
I do.
I don't.
I don't.
I don't.
And I don't want to say that I'm sticking to my answer and going with the opposite to say yes. I've come to the point where I don't know, because I can't think of a way to define thinking that you can't repurpose to have a machine do.
See, that's it, isn't it, right? Because every time you want to talk about can machines think, you're making an assumption about what it means to be a person, and you're never going to answer that.
Right?
And
Well,
so, there is no
is-
real answer.
Well, the thing with that is, it doesn't really matter that if they think or not. I mean, if you're gonna build robotic slaves, if they somehow manage to gain some self-awareness and some, semblance of, cohesive thinking and, independence, why would you want to keep them around? If, they are important and costly.
Fucking washing machine talks back to you. You don't want to do that shit.
That's not because it's, technologically advanced. It's because I hear voices. Anyway, but, I mean, the thing is, who cares if they think or not? They're robots. You have created them from the metal of the ground. You have created robots just because they don't like being enslaved. Fuck them. It only matters when you're made of flesh, not of metal.
And see, that's the thing. That's what makes it such an important question, I think. Because if it can think, if it is sentient and self-aware, then
So what?
you are enslaving and disposing of a thinking form of life.
Yep.
And doesn't that, in a way, kind of raise a different question in that, okay, so let's say they can't think, but is what they're doing... does it still have the same, if you assume that life has, inherent value? Is it possible that it may not be thinking, but it is doing something equally valuable or I guess, complex as thinking, that should be valued the same, but you don't because it's not of nature?
Well, that's the thing. If you're gonna take that, idea, then you're gonna have to... Most humans don't really even live up to those basic standards.
That's the other thing, is when you try to define thinking, you gotta wonder, do you, first of all, qualify moment to moment, and two, does fucking anybody? Alright, so my initial reaction to this was, well, no, of course they don't think, because any quote-unquote thoughts that they have would have come from the external world, either directly from a person putting that thought into them, or from them just taking that thought from someone else. There's an interesting little AI bot that Microsoft made and put on Twitter, and it introduces itself to the world, and it was supposed to learn from interacting with people. And it was online for a day, and it became a sexist, creepy, stalking Nazi in a day. like people started following it, and it would send them direct messages trying to get into their pants, and it was like, you know, just spouting all this racist Nazi stuff because that's what people told it to do.
So what you're saying is Ultron was the most realistic superhero film of all time.
Exactly.
You spend 1 minute on the internet, and that's what happens.
Exactly.
Well, the thing is...
No, hold on, I'm building to this. So you have, like, the idea that, oh, well, you know, we create our own thoughts, but do you? Are you just a product of what you see and what you're told?
See, and that's...
Like, when have you ever had truly an original thought?
See, and that's my thing, is that I don't believe in any sort of, like, inherent human nature, and so if everything comes from the outside, then there's no reason for a computer that gets input to not be considered a thinking thing.
Yeah, and I guess the question comes down to, is it a thinking thing or is it a simulated thinking thing?
Well, what's the difference? I mean, you have some people...
That's the problem.
But
like,
one thing that really bothers me, I mean, if you look at the internet, I mean, what's the internet? The internet is all the horrible shit we put into it. I mean, there is just categories upon categories of just vile, horrible sexual shit on this interconnected web of information. And if it one day became sentient like Ultron, what kind of horrible entity would we create?
It's Brainiac. That's why I love that scene in Action Comics where Brainiac explains that every civilization creates him, and that Earth called him the Internet. I love that. Fucking Grant Morrison's a genius. Yeah. It is a really, really complicated issue, and it's something that I think science fiction films deal with a lot. Like Voyager, Star Trek Voyager cracked me up because the Doctor in that show is a medical hologram. He's meant to be there for emergencies, which actually would make sense. If you have hologram technology that can interact and, you know, harm people, why not make it so it can help people? But he slowly becomes self-aware and becomes more and more of a person throughout that series. It's a really fascinating idea. He's kind of like the Data of that series. The only problem, and like a lot of his episodes center around whether or not machines can think, which is really what has put this in my head again. And the only problem with that is he and the captain have an argument about whether or not machines can think. At the end of the day, she realizes that she's wrong and that machines can think, and then she acknowledges the Doctor's, like, humanity used loosely, and they are stronger for it, until the next time that there's an issue with whether or not machines can think, in which case Janeway seems to forget that whole shit and go right back to square one. So they keep having this argument.
Well, the thing is, if a machine does kind of ask you, you know, tries to convince you that it can think, you really want to be on its good side, because if you go, like, you know, you can't think, you're just a toaster, and the toaster goes, no, bitch, I'm going to crash the spaceship into the sun, you know?
HAL 9000, motherfucker.
That's it. So every time they just kind of humor the AI, like, oh, yes, we're going to pretend like we're having a conversation, okay. Yes, you're a self-aware, sentient entity. Go back to doing your computer thing. And then next week he does the same thing again. I want to convince you that I'm sentient. Okay, sweetie. You're sentient. You think.
It's like dealing with an Alzheimer's patient.
I'm throwing another ingredient here. I'm throwing in some spices into this pot. Okay?
Go for it.
Okay. I think that, doesn't this, whether or not you think a machine can think, doesn't your answer to that question depend on your answer to the question of, do we have free will? Because...
Well, a purely sociopathic perspective, I mean, like...
Well, let Rasco do his
part. All right.
Because I would say that because a machine inherently is going to be reactionary pretty much. If you have some sort of artificial intelligence, it's going to be pretty much like, it would have to be some sort of like consciousness that is just filled with pretty much this, like what you guys were talking about with Ultron, where it's like he's on the internet for like a minute and then he turns into a genocidal maniac, and it's like that's really reactionary to pretty much all that he's intaking from the world around him. And so if you think that we don't necessarily have free will, and that like we are entirely reactionary to like the world around us, and like you react to a certain thing because of who you are, because of other things that happen to you that you've reacted to, and like if doesn't the answer kind of depend on what your answer to that question is as well?
Yeah, I think that still blurs the line, though, because if you think about it, just to use Ultron as an example, because he's always here, the way Ultron was designed in that movie is that there was basically an outline of a brain, and from there they toyed with it and they figured out that it was thinking, and thus they made Ultron. Mm-hmm. And so if it's just a construct that had input put into it, that really isn't any different from a brain, which is a construct that has input put into it. And I think whether or not you argue for free will or determinism, it's not. I don't think the concept of a brain that is just a construct that gets input put into it is necessarily only deterministic or only free will based. Mm-hmm. And so when you get to that, I don't think it comes down to free will versus determinism. I think it comes down more to just how much has to come from the person themselves as opposed to the outside in order to be constituted a person, and can anything actually come from the person themselves? Or are they like tabula rasa?
Okay.
Well, the thing is with that is human beings process information. There are people who just going to take it in and don't really process the world around them. They're just going to suck it up and digest it and poop it out the other end. I think every human has a certain level of self-awareness, I guess. And I guess it depends on whether you see yourself as yourself and you see how you interact with the rest of the world. I mean, that's how crazy people kind of get, cut out of the whole society thing. Well, you don't know what you are. You are acting crazy.
So that's really interesting. So, like, are you suggesting that, like, there are people that don't necessarily, that aren't necessarily thinking the same way others are?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. There's a neurological component to all of this.
Yeah.
I mean, you have human beings that, have Alzheimer's who literally create the same moment over and over again, who have, like, literally a 5-minute, memory span.
Yeah, but what about a machine that's on a loop?
Well, that's the thing. I guess it really has to do with the intricacy of the mechanism. I mean, if, our meat suits and our meat brains, they have a purpose. They have evolved to do a thing. And what we as humans do is we try to recreate what we are with metal and electricity. And whether or not we can actually recreate that same function with bits of, metal and electricity is yet to be seen. Maybe one day And it's a very weird question. It's even if the thing seems like it's thinking, does it really matter if it's not?
Well, see, to blur the line with the way you gave that example even more, how much of a difference is there in things that we call metal versus what we call flesh if metal is just a catch-all term for minerals? So, like, what really is the difference between my skin and a rock aside from random chemical composition? Because if you break it down, they're both technically periodic elemental metals.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
And they're both run on electricity. So whether I create a child or I make a computer, is there really, like, a physical difference?
Well, the thing is, we are a creature that's designed to replicate. Well, that's the thing. We are a creature that's designed to replicate. We only last for 100 years, more or less. Or, most of us die in our, nowadays we last quite longer than we usually were. And so your average human lifespan is about 90 years. And, you start out young. You reach your fruit of age. You're supposed to breed then. And then, it's just like you have a certain amount of time to live, and then you die. Now, for an entity that has no, like, real limitations on its lifespan, it can live forever, and it can grow psychologically. But we are only the product of our meat suits. Like, if you were young forever, would you still think the same? Would you still go out and have fun all the time? Would you do what you want to do? Would you want to stay young forever?
And that's really strange because also, like, when you talk about, like, a kid versus, like, a teenager, like, those brains are incredibly different, and how they perceive the world is incredibly different. And like a lot of what adds complexity to the personality of a teenager is that they start caring about things. Like they start to give a shit. Like you have a lot of teenagers that like get really political and like they start to really care. Like that stuff that you don't necessarily, they care about the world around them and their relation to it more. That's a lot of the added complexity, I guess, of who you are when you start to get older.
Yeah,
And like
but
that's a completely more sophisticated consciousness than a child.
I would actually argue the opposite. But it's. I
thing
keep
with
coming
that
back
is, look, the
to
human
my favorite argument.
Like,
Hold on.
okay.
I keep coming back to my favorite argument here, which is, you know, a machine only knows what you tell it to know, and you can certainly argue that about people, but let's try a little thought experiment here. And I'm going to go to Milan for this, because I think out of all of us, he is the most qualified for this. Milan,
Yeah.
3 words, give me a random thought.
I want pie.
Okay. Now, you could certainly make the argument that Milan has been influenced by social things. He's influenced by his current state of maybe hunger, or that he's drunk or high or whatever. I'd certainly make the argument that those things are there. But Milan isn't conscious or isn't purposefully putting in any calculations into processing that thought, right? He just thinks it happens randomly. With the machine, it only knows what you tell it to know or what it is programmed to take in. And then so if you ask a machine to think a random thought, it's not really thinking a random thought, it's pulling from different things that it's already been told.
Well, that's what we do as a human species. That's what we do anyway. I mean, if I was never introduced to the concept of pie, I mean, like, then how could I want it if I never knew about it?
I know, I get what you're saying, but I'm talking about the process of where it's pulling those things from. I think it's different for you than it is for a machine.
How so?
Because it's been told to think of pie. It's been told to generate things randomly and to store them in specific places.
Well, isn't that how the brain works?
You weren't shown pie, and then you specifically put it in one particular spot in your head. I guarantee you we could put you in a brain scan, say the word pie, and it lights up in a couple different spots.
Oh yeah.
So like there's more complicated and organic connections. So again, I think it comes down to, is a machine thinking, or is it a simulation of thinking that's so complicated we can't tell anymore?
I think regardless of how long this conversation goes, the one definitive statement we can make is that machines run on, their thought process runs on at least some sort of calculated procedure, and regardless of how many times we try to make up logical rules of perceptions, human brains don't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
So, if nothing else, the biggest difference between a sentient being and an artificial one is their ability to be random. So yeah, I can see where you're coming from there.
Yeah, because they have the ability to truly be random based on algorithm thought, or based on algorithms. Thank you. And humans do not. There's that experiment where you give a group. You give one group a coin and tell them to flip it 50 times or 100 times and write down each result. And then you give another group, like, a coin and tell them not to flip it but to write down 100 results. And then you have a statistician come in and look at the results, and they'll always be able to tell you which ones were actually, humans coming up with it and which ones were actual events of the coins being flipped. And it's because people do not have the ability to be truly random, and people do not have the ability to follow laws of probability just intuitively. They just don't. Mm-hmm. Whereas a machine, if you tell it to write down 50 coin tossing results, it would have to open a program to simulate tossing a coin based on random laws of probability as they actually exist 100 times, and then give you all 100 results.
And then to make the one concrete point that we've made less concrete, I would just ask, is that distinction large enough to warrant any sort of moral differentiation?
once again, I don't think it's like a large enough difference. I think it's a key difference that shows that it's not true thinking, it's simulation.
No, I agree. I just think that, does that matter?
Not really.
Well, I guess it depends on how real is a simulation, right?
Yeah.
I know no one here likes this film, but The Matrix makes a pretty good argument for this, right? If you woke up and you're in a virtual reality that perfectly simulates and stimulates you in every conceivable way in the real world, then what difference would it make that it's a simulation? And the point is, it's still a simulation. No matter how complicated, no matter how precise, no matter how indistinguishable from the real thing, it's a simulation, and therefore it is not the real thing.
But that doesn't mean it doesn't have value, is still the counter.
See, that's the thing, is like, at that point, you're not discussing destroying a life form, though. You're discussing destroying a achievement. And I think those are two radically different things, right?
Yeah, but like,
I think
does life, is it the fact that we are biotic, like living things, what makes us valuable? Like that makes our brains, our minds. Is it that it comes from a natural source?
I think part of it too is once you establish that it's a simulation and not an actual form of life. Milan, I'm echoing a bit. Not an actual form of independent life that just happens to be based on artificial principles and artificial means. I think once you establish that it's a simulation, then it is re-achievable. So it doesn't matter if you destroy it. That's why it's disposable.
I don't know if I agree with that, though.
I'm trying to think of a good example of this. Because, I mean, who here's been in a car wreck? Like, where the car was totaled?
I was.
Me too. You had memories associated with that car, I'm sure. Some of them special, some of them sad.
Yeah.
You had a life associated with that car. But it's not the car itself, it's what the value you brought to it. So it wouldn't be the simulation itself, it'd be the value you brought to the simulation. So while you might have some sentimental value attached to it, and while it might be important and it might be really, really difficult to achieve again, it's still conceivably possible. Right?
Yeah.
Like, you could go buy the exact same model of car and go either make new experiences that are just as important or attempt to recreate those old ones and, in your heart of hearts, as it were, assign the same values to those moments. It might be artificial and simulation again, so we're getting kind of into a spiral that I don't want to get into, but it's not the thing, it's not the car itself, it's not the machine, it's the sentimental value you put into it. That's why R2-D2 is important. Not because he actually thinks, but because we have sentimental value toward him, maybe.
Yeah, but then again, it's the spiral you don't want to go into where I'm like, I don't know if that distinction still matters, Like, it feels like it's an arbitrary distinction there just to help classify things, which is fine, we need classification, but I don't think it's enough to, like, just if you want to use classic literature as an example, I don't think it's enough to say, do androids dream of electric sheep? Yes, but that doesn't mean that they're moral. I think, no, they do, but this is still, that still makes them important in some way, whether the experience is artificial or not. Like, okay, another example is, there's an episode of Young Justice where the entire team is doing a simulation where they're basically Justice League has been defeated, they have to take over and try and survive. And they didn't know it was a simulation, but the experience they went through was so overly traumatic that everything went haywire, and when they got out, they had to have trauma therapy. And so, to them, regardless of that being a simulation, it still has value to them.
Yeah,
and it still has moral weight to them. They can still hold each other accountable for what they thought in that simulation or the events of that simulation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my thing, is just I feel like that's a distinction that's purely artificial, and when you get past a certain phase of humanity, you don't need it anymore.
And I'd agree that it's a superficial distinction, but if it were just answering the question, do or can machines think, I think it's an important distinction that shows that no matter how complicated it gets, it's still a simulation.
That's fair, but that's fair, and I get where you're
I'm
coming
not
from.
saying that it doesn't have value as a simulation. Like, art's a simulation of reality a lot of the times. It doesn't mean that art doesn't have value. It just has, I think, a different kind of value at that point.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think it's just, for me, if you flash forward 200 years, it's going to be a distinction that doesn't matter anymore, and it's something that's only applicable to this one moment in time when we don't have an answer.
It'll be interesting. I'll throw this back to Milan and Rasco in a second here. I just want to bring up one example of like the famous Turing test.
Yeah.
And it's not really valid anymore because it's been beaten and we still don't consider machines to be thinking things. But Alan Turing, basically considered the grandfather of computers. Our country, basically forced him into suicide because he was a faggot. Anyway, happy, love America. Fourth of July is in a month. Anyway, so Alan Turing proposed a test to see if a machine could be classified as thinking. And that test is, can a human being sit down and be in some form of conversation with a machine and not realize it's a machine? And so as we've moved into this age of computers where we have instant messaging and stuff, there are things called bots. And so we've developed bots to try to mimic thinking. And importantly, they're mimicking thinking. And so people have been beaten by the machines and thought they were in a conversation with the real person. Importantly, though, I think Turing meant like that you could actually talk to one in person sitting down.
Yeah, he was more literal about that stuff.
Yeah, but importantly, the very basic bare bones of the test has been, beaten. And so it's interesting to think about that. The fact that we are almost at a point where people are at least easily fooled by it, right?
Yeah.
Rasco, on any thoughts you want to throw in at this moment? Because Steve and I kind of just took off there for a few minutes.
Go ahead, Rasco.
I don't really know. This makes me want to go watch Ex Machina again.
Right? Yeah, it's the same thought.
I want to see
this new movie about fucking that. It's some robot girl and there's a guy interviewing her.
Yeah, that's Ex Machina.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. I haven't seen it.
Really
Looking great.
See, that's the thing. I've been thinking about sex robots recently, and I'm like, if you make a robot that looks like a woman or a man, depending on what your preference is, and you give it to somebody as a product of fucking, right? And the thing becomes sentient, and it doesn't want to be fucked anymore. It doesn't want to be a sex doll. What do? Is it just a programming error? Do you wipe its memory and do it all over again? How the ethics of sex robots?
It's actually a really fucking good question.
Yeah.
Because I mean, who here has slapped their printer, right? Who here has been like, God fucking damn it, why don't you just work, you piece of garbage machinery? You have one fucking job. And, like, that's just a printer. Imagine when you get mad at your sex robot for going off in the corner and crying because it doesn't want to sleep with you. Jesus. This is a whole, like, there's a laundry list of ethics here. It's a really complicated question. Because on one hand, it's like, well, it's a form of life at that point. If you, depending on how you think about it and how far beyond we've gone with this. But on the other hand, how fucking annoying would that be if you just bought a thing to do one specific job and it just didn't feel like it anymore. I mean, do machines have workers' rights? Here's an interesting issue, and I really wish we had Alex on, because one of the big things in modern communist thought is, yes, machines need to be a bigger part of the workplace to replace menial jobs so people can go find self-fulfillment more. And, well, what happens when your machines gain sentience and then they don't want to work because they find it menial and degrading?
You know what's interesting? I just read Megatron Origin, because I've been going through the IDW collection, and the way the book opens is Megatron is a worker in a Cybertron Energon mine, and all of the robots that are working in that mine are about to be replaced by automated systems to mine Energon. So it's sentient robots creating non-sentient robots to replace sentient robot workers.
Oh, man.
That's just a weird, crazy inception of the sentience. I don't even know what you'd call it.
Mm-hmm. Shit, I keep running away with the conversation. Milan, well, what are your opinions on robot sex worker ethics?
Well, that's the thing. If it's just a mannequin, a very good mannequin that kind of moves, it's a high-class sex doll in today's age. In today's, it's all right, I guess. It's passable for your average pervert. But if you're gonna go into this business trying to advance the technology of sex dolls, and of course, once you've broken the code of having a robot that kind of acts like a human, what you want to do is to have a robot that looks cool to fuck, If you want to, just ridiculously huge tits that feel right, a big old badonk-donk that feels right, I mean, it would be so much more cheaper to just hire a prostitute to do that and pretend to be a robot than to actually invest the money to engineer such a creation and sell it on the market.
But the point is that it would sell. You don't even have to ask, would it sell?
No,
it would.
The thing is, it's not that I don't mean it's gonna sell. Of course, it's gonna sell, regardless of how horrifying and how far off the uncanny valley we kick it off. No matter how horrifying it might look like, someone's gonna fuck it and someone's gonna pay money to fuck it. But once we reach that level of aesthetics that lets the mind actually think, you know what, this thing's actually fuckable. I don't even care if it's a cold piece of, machinery and plastic. I'll still fuck it and come in it. I mean,
we fuck vibrators and fleshlights.
Exactly. You can have it like a go-go gadget thing. It turns into like 6 dildos or something. I don't know.
I really want to see what protocol droids are like in intimate bedroom nights in Star Wars now. I imagine that some sick bastard in Star Wars universe had to get horny for C-3PO at one point.
Oh, dude, I highly doubt in this world.
Actually, there's a really famous trading card cover that makes C-3PO look super well endowed. Almost as well endowed as Batman on the issue of Batman Rebirth #1. That dude is hung like a horse on that comic book.
Dude,
sorry.
Dude.
Batman has, it's the biggest wang ever. I call it the Batawang now, thanks to comics.
That's it, man. But this is the thing about, I'm sure if you go on the internet, you can find porn with somebody fucking a C-3PO replica.
I'm sure you could.
Yeah, and this is... I just found the perfect quote to describe the internet.
I know Joel Davis is watching this and just losing his shit right now. No one would fuck C-3PO.
There's a whole subculture about it. I just found it. Anyway, here's a quote that describes the internet perfectly. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and if it was not, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. If we fucking look at the thing too long, and it shows us what we are, either we go back to killing each other with rocks, or we achieve something greater than ourselves, and we move on from this point.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's a really complicated question. Someone else weigh in on this. When your sex robot no longer wants to sleep with you, how do you react? Do you wipe its memory? Is it a malfunction, or is it a rights issue at that point?
You punch it in the face.
Follow-up question. Why? Ask it why. Like, it really depends on the conversation that you have with it where it tells you this.
Yeah, but don't you have... Why should you have to have a conversation if it's just a fucking printer, right?
I guess it depends on, like, you'd have to know the robot, I guess. You know?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you have to have experienced this robot for a while in order to be like, yeah, fuck you? You know?
Mm-hmm. Well, no, I mean, it's just like... Would you have like, alright, so... You're pissed off at your printer because you're in a hurry, you're trying to do some shit, you're trying to get some shit done, and your printer's sitting there and it's giving you shit about, like, it's not able to print for whatever fucking reason, and it's like, why the fuck won't you work? And it just tells you, well, I'm just going through a lot of stuff right now, and I don't feel like I'm up to it. And you're in the middle of a fucking rage, you're gonna deal with that? The sex robot thing is just more naturally fun to talk about and adds like an extra ethical layer to it. But I mean, would you really sit there and fucking listen to your printer bitch and whine about its life? It's a fucking... No, fuck... Like, that would piss me the hell off, and I would throw the thing across the room and get a new printer. But if you bring in the ethics of, well, now it's a thinking thing, I'm like, well... Fuck, what do I do with that?
There's an episode of Rick and Morty where this is just a very tiny cutaway gag in the beginning of a bigger episode, but the gag is Rick builds a tiny robot to pass butter, and after a few times where it passes butter, he's like, what is my purpose? And then Rick's just like, you pass butter. And then he like stares at his hands and he says, is this all I am? And then Rick's like, welcome to the club.
Okay, here's another layer, like, doesn't it also partially matter what potential that machine has? So, like, if you just went out and destroyed your fucking printer just because you decided you wanted to, you could say, oh, well, like, if your printer is thinking, but, like, how much potential does that printer have on its own without people? Without, like, you being there to operate it, or without, like, existing in a society? How much potential does that individual printer have? Whereas, like, a sex robot, depending on how complex the mind of that sex robot is, it may have potential to be something much greater than just an object for your use.
Or would it be ostracized, right? Yeah. Would it be like it's only a sex robot? It's not going to get a job. Yeah. No one's gonna hire a sex robot to be a waitress. Mm-hmm. They don't want that image projected on their restaurant. No, it's a really, really fucking weird idea. And so it just gets into this whole layer of ethics. And when you ask, well, what value does it have outside of its, intended purpose? It's like, well, what value do you have? Like, it gets into a weird eugenics thing. Or, no, not eugenics. What's the word I want here? Steve, help me out.
What about purpose? What, like, utility?
Yeah, like, oh, well, this person doesn't serve any purpose, so we can just kill them, and it's not a big deal.
You know what else is also an inherently different...
I'm sorry, Rasko. What was that, Steve?
Just utility?
Yeah, utility. Sure. Utility when it comes to people's fucking lives. That's a weird idea. Go ahead, Rasko.
I was just going to say, this is also an inherently interesting thing when you're talking about machines versus people. People are not created with a specific purpose other than necessarily then we can reproduce, and I guess that's in a way you can perceive that as your purpose. But we kind of decide what we want our purpose in life to be. Like a lot of people, at least we
in this world has a function. Rasko,
but a machine is typically made for a purpose.
Rasko. Everyone in this world has a function. Either you work hard to get the function you want, or one will be assigned to you.
I disagree with that.
Yeah,
No, I
agree.
agree. That's the truth, man. I mean, look, if you're the type of guy who doesn't get the good job and doesn't get the position to do the thing that he wants, then you will be assigned a position. If you're not if you don't work hard to be a guy that doesn't have to work
you can
money.
leave society. You can go live in the woods if you choose to.
Well, who fucking wants to live in the woods?
I mean, have you ever read?
Well, I don't know. I guess I could see an argument. that is your assigned position now as crazy hermit who lives in the woods.
That's it.
Society just doesn't have any fucking use for you.
Yeah.
It's possible
like if
that
we
you
live in
choose
a
that, though. Like,
utilitarian
if you read the book Into the Wild, it's kind of what raises question with me, at least, because it's like that's a story about a guy who decides to go live off in the wilderness because that's what he craves and that's what he wants to do.
That's the guy that like died in like 2 weeks or whatever.
No. Like he died living in Alaska, but like he went on all crazy like wilderness adventures on his way.
Okay, there's just one story about a guy who like gives up everything, goes and lives in the woods and like dies 2 weeks or 2 months later or something. He was like living in a bus.
Yeah, Christopher McCandless, I think is what his name was.
Okay. It's a really weird, complicated ethical issue. I mean, it sounds like your immediate reaction, well, no, if it's a thinking thing, then fuck you, you shouldn't do that. But I'm like, well, fuck you. I'm not going to go buy a printer every time the goddamn thing decides it wants something more out of life, because you know fucking printers would pull that shit, because they're assholes.
It's why Carly Fiorina was such a bad candidate for president. I don't trust a person that can't make a working printer.
Exactly. You stole that joke.
I did steal that joke from you.
No, but like seriously, just thinking about all the issues like this, you see how like just shitty people treat droids in the Star Wars universe. But like you got to think about it. Every person that acts like that towards droids had a fucking R2 unit that just decided it wanted to go to Hollywood and make something of itself. So they like spent $5,000 to have something just fucking roll out the door one day. Fuck that. That's some bullshit. Like, that's probably in the fucking warranties when you buy the droids. It's like, warning, since this is programmed with a personality, it may one day decide that it wants something more out of life, and there ain't shit you can do about it. Tough luck, motherfucker. Non-refundable.
I swear that, like, Star Wars is the most accurate portrayal of, like, of how humans will interact with AI. Like, that is so how people interact with their robots. Like, fuck you, C-3PO, you stupid bitch. Like, that's the exact kind of treatment people would give to their robots in like, this world with, like, you know, like, imagine how a Trump supporter would treat his android.
Yeah.
Well, like, here's the thing, though. What's her name? Chelsea Lately. She had a series of documentaries on Netflix, and they're actually really fucking good. Because she's just, like, a really uninformed but, you know, naturally curious person. So she asks a lot of really good questions just based on natural childlike curiosity from a, you know, kind of drunk, comedian chick. Anyway, she does, like, an episode about technology and everything, and she gets into, not quite as much as I would have hoped, but she gets into the idea of thinking machines. And the most complicated robot that is an attempt to think right now is kind of like a bust of a woman, like a bust of a black lady, I'm pretty sure, and it's based off an actual person, and it just, you know, people sit there and have conversations with her, and she's a bitch. She's just like, she just says whatever the fuck comes to mind, and people, you know, she's learning from people, and people are rude to her, so she just fucking is rude as hell back. And the idea that you would have in Star Wars, you know, people having to talk to droids, just do anything. Who here has had to deal with a fucking automated answering service, and it takes like 20 minutes to get a hold of a real person and just explain your problem to them? When if you just called and talked to a real person right off the bat, you could have explained your problem and you could have been off the phone in 5 minutes as opposed to half an hour. And I think that's what every single interaction with a droid is like in the Star Wars universe. Like, you walk into the store and you go, hey, and the droid is like, hello, press 1 if you would like some bolts. Press 2 if you would like some oil. And you're just sitting there for like half an hour waiting on the motherfucker to get through his list. Because he has to go through every single item in the inventory of the store. And you're just like, fucking Christ. Like that, it would be so frustrating to have to deal with things that don't actually think if we're going with that interpretation. Like if we assume that machines can actually think, if they're actually thinking at the same rate as people, and it's not a simulation, and it's definitely not a bad simulation, that's one thing. But if we're dealing with machines that are thinking in a simulation, particularly the worse that simulation gets, the more or the less value that I think they have.
Okay, that's cool.
Thanks. Awkward silence.
Yeah.
Steve, take us somewhere.
So another thing I've been sitting on with this particular topic is language, because philosophy of language kind of dominated the 20th century. It sort of became like the crux of everything for a while.
And it's insane.
And it was really interesting in places and really retarded in places. But one of the things I find really interesting is the use of language and its rules that are very clearly there to be broken. Like, language isn't a perfect thing. Language is a thing that's always evolving. And so when I see people get upset about new additions to dictionaries, I just always wonder in my mind that people realize that there are multiple dictionaries. And the words there just kind of reflect what's part of society now. They're not hard and fast rules. And so there's this Twitter bot that basically does this thing where he takes a sentence from a book, and every single day it posts that exact same sentence with different punctuation marks to change the meaning of the sentence constantly. And it's programmed to do this, and apparently there were so many different punctuation marks that fit within that sentence that it can go infinitely for at least 100 years.
Wow.
Which is crazy.
Well, it's not infinite at that point, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's weird, but it's crazy. But I mean, I think that really speaks to the versatility of machines and whether or not their ability to think is really enough. It's kind of making me the reverse of the point I made earlier of they can think, but so what?
Yeah, because they'll be so mired down by we get to the idea of technological singularity, which I'll quickly define for people. Technological singularity means that technology is developed to a point that everything that can be invented and can thought of to be invented has been. There's no new technology left. It's all figured out now. So maybe once you get to the point of technological singularity, you can have machines that are going to be able to process enough calculations quickly enough to form complex sentences and thoughts to make you think that they're actually thinking. But again, where is it pulling it from? And once it does pull those things from those places, will it respond in enough time to seem natural? Will the sentence make sense? And, to be fair, language has one very specific purpose that I think the analytic philosophers kind of completely missed in their assertion that language is everything. And that is that it is meant to give you the best possible attempt to convey an idea, but we all kind of acknowledge secretly that it's really, really bad at that. Which is why we have what's called misinterpretation, or multiple interpretations of a sentence.
Yep. That's why we had to invent a principle of charity to begin with, is because we don't always know what each other means.
Yeah, and so... No, I mean, seriously, language has one job, and it's really bad at it. No matter how good your vocabulary gets, it's always going to be really bad at it. So you can program a machine to have, the most extensive vocabulary ever, but what if it's using words that have fallen out of circulation for 200 years?
Cinematic language is a really good example of how bad we are at communicating, where you look at a scene and the idea is supposed to be, okay, this person's dead because this thing made contact with this other thing, but that's you making assumptions about what's not actually there. And so you can get multiple people saying that this scene means different things, and no one really has any proof to pull on that it's one thing or the other.
Yeah, and like what happens when you use 3 pronouns in one sentence that all refer to different things, but it's the same pronoun?
Yeah.
He, and he, all in one sentence. And each he refers to a different person.
Yeah. I mean, it's...
And, like, I don't think a machine can follow that.
Okay, I think a machine can follow that. I think the problem is what you said earlier, is where it can't follow that naturally. Because there is logical language pressed to try and make that work. The problem is just, you turn a sentence that's very simple into something that's very complicated. And if I had my webcam, I'd show you, like a very simple thing of, like, I like everything, how would that turn into, like, a 6-line symboled statement, and how that's completely impractical.
Yeah, and so the idea of a machine being able to process all that information quickly enough, I mean, I don't think that, even if you could get one that could do it, how long could it possibly keep it up for, right? You'd need to constantly be... Because, like, even until you get to technological singularity, parts are obsolete within a year. So you have a processor that's able to handle these complicated sentence structures and ideas for a year, and then it has to be replaced. And if you're a human being and your brain has to be replaced every year because it can't keep up, I don't think that you really should have to keep being around anymore. Maybe. I don't know if I agree with that sentence as I say it, because it sounds kind of fucked up, but...
No, I see where you're going with it. I read a pretty good article about this earlier because I wanted to be prepared for this, and it brings up this idea that human life is inherently valuable because it's limited, that we wouldn't give a shit about the morality of death if death wasn't a thing. Doesn't matter if I hurt you because you're always going to live. And so they make this case for artificial intelligence being moral regardless of its ability to think, because it's got the exact same ability to die. And it's interesting because death apparently has like 6 different definitions, which I didn't know about, and it's crazy how many very small differences could mean you're technically alive or technically dead. And they use an example from, I think it's Blade Runner, I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but I think it's Blade Runner, but they use the example of, if at some point, it's Blade Runner because it's Rachel, but if at some point Rachel needs a certain kind of chip to continue functioning, is that not just as bad as this person that's kidneys failing and they're on a donor list but there's no matches?
And the question is, when you replace this processor chip or whatever, when you replace the brain, does it change the personality? And in that case, is it still the same person? Is it still the same machine? Or is it a different machine that is a simulation of the simulated thinking thing?
I mean, yeah, ship of Theseus, you can go with that all day long. If I change the machine's outer skin coating, is it still the same machine?
No, I mean, I'm talking about the mechanism that is actually making it think.
Okay, no, I see what you're saying. Well, see, then that even gets into the further question. I wish we watched Transcendence. I didn't see that movie, but I feel like this would be a good example of it, where, like, if someone just replicates someone else's brainwave patterns into a machine, is it still that person?
And that's a really interesting question that gets into transhumanism. Yep. And I can't... I'm really Star Trek-y tonight. I think I really want to see an origin story of the Borg and have it be transhumanism gone wrong. Because, on one hand, I like some of the ideas in transhumanism. I think there's some great ideas in not having stigmas about people having robotic parts when they need them. People in wheelchairs don't have to be in wheelchairs anymore. They can walk around. Blind people can see with robotic eyes. That kind of stuff. It's beautiful. But I think the Borg are transhumanism gone wrong, where it doesn't matter if you don't have a disability or not. These mechanical parts are better, so you're going to be equipped with them. And it doesn't matter if you like it or not, because the whole of this massive technological cyborg little machine is more important than what your individual wants are, so we're going to put these parts on you no matter what. And it doesn't matter if you're required to do something by the machines in your head that is going to put what few parts you have left or what parts we've replaced on you in danger, because what we want as a collective is more important than anything on you. Everything about you is replaceable when you get to a certain level of transhumanism, and that's the part that frightens me about it.
And I mean, it's pretty easy to see that as a very natural exaggeration of something like the vaccine argument.
Vaccine argument?
Like the whole idea of you should vaccinate because it's for the good of everyone and not just you, regardless of whether or not you need it.
Yeah, and okay, I just want to make sure we're not giving fuel to the, kids get autism thing. So
no. I just mean like because the people that think you shouldn't vaccinate your kids for whatever reason are idiots, but I could see that going to an extreme where they say you haven't lost your arm, but robot arms are better.
Yeah, and so the idea
robot
of
arms are better. What are you talking about?
Which they are.
Yes.
But should you be in a position where the society forces you to cut off your arm for the sake of being better abstractly?
All right,
sure.
so here's a way to put it. Here's a way to put it. You're an unemployed individual. You really, really need work. The only job that is open to you requires someone that is able to lift 2,500 pounds. The only person that's going to be able to lift 2,500 pounds is a person with robotic arms. You have two perfectly functioning human arms. Do you cut them off to get that job?
Fuck yeah.
Or do you sue the company for not being accommodating of your disability of having human arms?
Nah, fuck that. I'll cut those motherfuckers. I'll fucking cut them off myself.
Job, and you can't fucking do the job. If you want to cut your arms off, go for it. I'm all for body rights. Control your own body. Cut off your limbs if you want to.
Well, it's not because I'm mentally ill. It's just because I need a job.
But I think that also gets into, again, back to where we started of, is there something about the flesh that's just inherently more valuable to the point where that's something to be concerned about?
And that's just, and that's the case where it's like, I don't place any sort of value on the fact that, it makes the fact that we came to exist a little bit, in a way, maybe inherently more unique or unlikely. But even then, though, we're born of some of the most abundant. We're pretty much made of what existed for us to be made of. So we're even not that unlikely to exist, given the circumstances of where we exist in the universe, I guess. But
I mean, that's the only thing that could have happened. That we exist proves that we should have existed.
Yeah. It goes back to the idea of that we are not as special as we think we are, and if that's the case, why do we have such a problem with giving other things rights?
Yeah,
it's because I think this isn't entirely related to that, but I think, do you diminish the rights of a person by extending them to non-persons?
Don't
and I'll do this with something that I've had personal experience trying to argue against, and it's just really tricky, but it's also really fucking stupid, and I shouldn't have to have this argument, particularly when I'm at work. Supreme Court a couple years ago legalized gay marriage. Very next day, fucking fat tubby asshole I work with comes in saying that he wants people to sign a petition to allow him to marry his waifu.
What?
Why doesn't his... Yes.
Whoa, what?
Yes.
You serious?
Yes. Swear to a God I don't believe in. Now, for those that don't know what a waifu is, it's a cartoon character to which you are devoted as if it's your actual romantic partner. Make an argument against that does not involve speciesism and is also not an argument used against gay marriage or just more broadly LGBT rights.
What do you want us to do?
It's a really fucking puzzling thing, but I don't care how much you care about your fucking cartoon character. It's a goddamn cartoon character. I don't have to extend it the same rights as a human fucking being.
You gotta... If he was in Russia, he'd just be beaten by Nazi skinheads. Just like... You know, once, like, in Russia, it's not like in America where you can just say whatever and not get beaten. In Russia, if you say something that retarded, you're gonna get a beating from your fellow co-workers, you know?
I think that particular example is even more scary because then you think about the fact that art does have rights, that it...
Not really, it's a picture of a...
No, it does, though. It does. Like, you can't deface art. Like, you can't go into a museum and just, like, spray paint everything. Art, socially, has at least some sort of de facto value. And so if a guy just wants to marry what he considers to be art...
No, he doesn't consider it to be art. He considers it to be a person.
Okay, he considers it to be a person, but it can be defined as art.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying, though, is how do you make... Alright, so does he have the right to equate it to the same thing as gay marriage, or is it a completely separate issue at that
point? And that's the thing. That's the whole point I'm making is of, like, when you get into an example like that, it just opens a can of worms of things that we are not really ready to wrestle with yet.
No, well,
and I don't think it should have to. I think it's insulting to the LGBT
Steve,
community.
Right.
Steve, please, let's not try to, this is not some great philosophical question. It's a dude who wants to marry a cartoon.
I think that it kind of comes down to the fact that the cartoon can't give consent of any sort.
It's a fucking cartoon! Why are you talking about consent?
No,
that's really the answer. Like, isn't that has to be part of it? Because, like, part of specifically...
Put him in a nut house. Fucking pump some antipsychotics into him. Beat the shit out of him.
Yeah, it does seem like it's only a question someone who is not in their right mind would ask, right?
Of course. Jesus Christ.
Because it's like wanting to marry Jessica Rabbit.
That's...
But it's like you said, where, like, you could very easily twist some of that to limit rights of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, like, how do you handle these issues of non-human things? Do you give them rights, or do you by saying that waifus deserve the same right to marry as gay people, you're insulting gay people at that point, right?
No, you absolutely are. It's just a matter of there's a bigger can of worms behind all this.
And won't there always be that religious sect that, like, would never even consider the thought of machines having some sort of, like, value to their existence?
Yeah,
because they don't have, like, in their perceived eyes, like, a soul, the way, like, they perceive humans to have, like, a soul.
Mm-hmm.
If we, and not to pick on anyone, but if we fast forward a little bit and we get to a place where artificial intelligence is a regular thing, we get to Blade Runner, are Mormons bad people?
No, they just wish to acknowledge the innate humanity of a thing.
Because we insult... from a regular basis, there's a lot of insults hurled at Christians for not being pro-gay marriage. You get to a world where artificial intelligence is just day-to-day operations. Is it bad to be Mormon? Is it bad to actively be against that level of technology?
Well, the thing is with that, it's only just anything like that, any question like that, is just a matter of perspective from the society. Let's just say, you know, I'm going to use gay people. Like, I don't want them queers to get married. Them fucking in the goddamn fucking...
It's like a Bostonian accent.
They're having sex in the fire. They're just dicks and cocks and vaginas everywhere.
Okay.
Yeah. And like back in the day, if you bring somebody from the 50s to here, to to America, on a gay pride parade, and say, like, literally everything the racist grandpa of America had to say has become true. Everything every homophobe has ever said has become true. No.
It's actually kind of like reminiscent though of like one of my favorite parodies of Captain America. It was like this little comic strip where it was Cap talking to the Avengers about Black Panther. It's like, no, listen, I'm not saying that he shouldn't be on the team. I'm saying that he should have his own Avengers team. Like, what if you just take it, like, Cap is obviously, you know, the classic example of, you know, here's a person with totally modern values that keep getting more modern as time goes on, that just happened to be living in the 40s, then had the benefit of getting frozen in ice and gets to be unthawed in a world that's pretty well in line with the things he was thinking that were wrong with his world. But anyway,
that's why Remender's Cap is so interesting, is because he had a tougher time with that kind of stuff. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, if you actually took some guy from the 40s and froze him in ice and unthawed him now, he's going to, like, see a woman scientist who's like, nurse, please get me the real doctor. And a beer while you're at it. Sugar tips. Like, that's the guy that's going to come out of that fucking ice, right? He's not going to be this, you know, modern man. And so there would be culture shock. There's a great fucking issue of Transmetropolitan that deals with this, too. You have a lady who is really fucking progressive for her time. You know, she photographed the Vietnam War and the Berlin Wall come down and all this other shit. And then there's a company that offers cryogenics, and her husband sign up for it. And she gets unthawed X amount of years later in the Transmetropolitan world, and she walks out on the sidewalk. Boom! Culture shock. No matter how ahead of the curve you think you're thinking, society naturally goes further than you could ever possibly imagine. So if you freeze me in ice right now, no, men and women should not be able to marry cartoon characters. You unthaw me 1,000 years from now, maybe that's just fucking normal thing. And I just
you know what it is?
Have too old school of values to be able to understand
from Archer. He's just going to have a little hologram thing floating around.
Oh, I fucking love Krieger and his goddamn holographic waifu. That shit's hilarious.
Isn't it also possible that, like...
every day. I totally do.
Isn't it, like, completely possible, though, that, like, in, like, say, like, 200 years, like, societal structure is so different, the question of whether or not a waifu should be allowed to get married to someone is not even, like, a question you would even have to ask. Like, what if in 200 years our system of, like, there is no such thing as, like, man-on-wife marriage that, like, lasts, but will ideally last to death? What if it's, like, this weird system of everyone has sex with everyone and there is no such thing as, like, monogamy and, like, and kids are raised by, like, some sort of, like, government structure that provides for like, you know, like, what if
Granny goodness. Darkseid is the master of the world.
Yeah.
Everyone gets to fuck all they want, and all the children get raised by Granny.
I want Tim Curry to play Granny Goodness. I want Tim Curry to play Granny Goodness in a live-action movie with the New Gods. He would totally fucking pull that off. Anyway, it's a really weird issue, and I want to get back to the can machines think thing, but it's just, it all builds off of things. Like, this is a really, really, really complicated philosophical issue. And, Steve, I mentioned that I think it is one of the more practical philosophical questions of recent years, and you kind of pushed back on that a little bit. So let's use this to transition to that.
Okay, I just pushed back the practical aspect because of exactly the reason where this conversation turned out. I feel like regardless of where this answer comes, wherever we come on artificial intelligence, it's always going to be contingent on more abstract philosophical discussions about like what sort of things have moral standing.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't say it's one of the most practical, simply because I think that the whole idea of artificial intelligence is its own broad category, but that's still subservient to other categories. And so I just think it's difficult to talk about that, as we've demonstrated, in isolation.
No, certainly, but I mean, just the question itself has more of a immediate bearing. You know,
Yeah.
What was the Spike Lee movie, Her? Because that's an interesting blend of where this question is and what we were talking about with where do we assign values, where the guy falls in love with Siri. It's such a complicated issue,
Yeah.
and I think that you have your knee-jerk reaction of, no, machines can't think, or yes, machines can think. But then the more you think about it, the more you just don't know, because it depends all upon your definition.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the way I think we've defined it in this episode is probably really clear to us, at least. But if you have a different definition of thinking, and I think it's interesting to look in the schools of philosophy, continental and analytic. I think the continental philosophers are more likely to one way or another come down on no, machines can't think, but the analytics will always come down on yes. Just kind of consistently, they'll come down on yes because they want to think like computers. And so I think it's interesting to look at the divide there,
Yeah.
and to just see how everything functions in that light. And it is a really practical question in philosophy that branches out, and it is almost something that's come to a head of that philosophy has been building to for 19th century, last 150 years. And that's really fucking fascinating. Does anyone have anything else they wanted to bring up with can machines think?
Whether they will or won't be able to think, depending on whether or not society crumbles before that technological advance is actually reached, really depends on humanity. But personally, I don't mind fucking a sentient robot, I mean, if you're gonna have a robot that's sentient, and it's gonna demand
You're gonna
right,
want to fuck it.
of course, if there's all the right equipment is engaged.
Since the dawn of time, man has asked one question. Yeah, but can I fuck it?
Exactly. Fucking kill it or eat it, man. That's it.
I find that really entertaining.
Yeah.
Anyway. Okay, that'll do it for this week's episode. Who's gonna pick a topic for next week? We need a review topic. Going once, going twice, 3 times. Okay, we're gonna go with something so much less complicated, because we've had some really, really heavy shit the last couple weeks. We're gonna go with Looney Tunes Back in Action.
Hooray!
Yeah, it's on Netflix. Just nice and brainless, but not really. Just nice, low-brow entertainment.
Wait, you said it's on Netflix, right?
I believe so.
Okay, cool. I have actually not seen that movie in a long time.
Yeah. So we'll see how well that holds up. Whoever's going to be here will be here. I've given up hope on trying to check and make sure who's going to be in attendance. Whew! Okay. We got it, guys. We're good.
We're good.
We're good.
Skynet, our future lords and masters, we totally think machines can think, and we think you're awesome, so please don't send Terminators to kill us all. Until next time, I'm the philosopher.
I'm the politician.
I'm the Squampus.
And I'm the madman.
And we are your geeky gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.